Barnett.
Thank you. We don't minimize what happened at all. This is serious, it is tragic, and that is the nature of toxic relationships. What was she supposed to do? Well, you heard on the tape in her interview from other incidences that she called the police. She called the police in Maryland. She didn't call the police until after she fought and after she fired here. Her child was in another room. She didn't hunker down with her child. The child was asleep and slept through all of this fighting. She was not beat to a bloody pulp. You saw the tape, you saw the interview, you heard the statements. If she was a bloody pulp, she would have been hospitalized. She would have had bandages on her head. Something more. But she was treated and she was released. She was not admitted to the hospital. So the characterization that this is a bloody pulp is not accurate. Matt Mott was in that hall, we know that, but the defendant went into that hall with an AR-15. She was not brutally beaten. They told you at the beginning of this case that she was treated for hours at the hospital. It was just a couple of hours, and it wasn't ongoing treatment the whole time she was there. You heard that from Major Graham. He spent more time waiting, and then they were discharged. She didn't do CPR right away. She called her mother. And then she called 911. And when you listen to that tape, and that tape had a count, CPR really wasn't started until almost 3/4 of the way through that. Don't think about the evidence that we don't have. Think about all of the evidence that we have. Okay? The evidence that they want you to believe we don't have is what Matt Mott was going to do in the hallway. But Matt Mott had a gun pointed at him. And that gun was brought into this by the defendant. All these guns in this house, but yet Matt Mott didn't go get one. The coulda, woulda, shouldas are not the evidence. This is not the scene from Pretty Woman, because nobody in Pretty Woman had a gun. If Julia Roberts would have had a gun, it wouldn't have been the blockbuster hit that it was. She didn't lock herself down in her room, which I don't think that's retreat. That's just, what should she do? Wait for the cavalry. I have my phone, I can call 911, and I can wait for the cavalry. And who knows what would have happened if he'd have come through the door and you're cornered. We may not be here. But that's the coulda, woulda, shouldas. The mere fact that Matt Mott went down that hallway, he's the only person to know what was in his mind, and he's not here. What we do know is that he wasn't armed. He was unarmed and he was shot. She never said in her interviews that she thought she was going to die. The gun she kept, the magazine, separate, not because her child was in the house, but was because of her therapist's advice. You got that from the interview. We know from Matt Mott's autopsy there was no stippling and no powder burns, and the medical examiner told you that that would indicate if those items were present, that he was very close to the weapon. None of that was present, and he was not there. She wasn't a bloody pulp. She wasn't brutally beaten. When Matt Mott left that room, he left the room. The defendant took the gun and went to the hallway. Now, in the instructions, you will be instructed on deadly force and the state's burden of proof for self-defense, that the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did not act in self-defense if one of four things is present. If we proved one of four things, don't have to prove all of them. That the defendant was at fault in creating the situation. Okay. She left that room with that gun. Did the defendant not have a reasonable grounds to believe she was in imminent danger of death? Well, he was in the hallway, but he wasn't armed. The defendant used unreasonable force, again, being unarmed. No gun. She had the gun. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe the evidence, when you look at the whole evidence, from the beginning of the 911 call to the end of her interview, and everything in between, that you will find that this was not justified. And we ask that you return a verdict of guilty. Thank you.
You may.